It means that. But why? Well, fundamentally, what's at the core of this? Why is it so wrong? Because it's stupid to say somebody's worth less than you because they have different skin color.
Amen.
How arbitrary is it to say that? Do we really think a person's worth is wrapped up in their skin color? Obviously not. Same with your gender. Do we fundamentally think you're more valuable as a person because you're male or female? Of course not. That's ridiculous. It's stupid. It's an arbitrary characteristic that you accidentally have. That's not a good basis for determining human value and worth. So right, we should fight for equality and treat people with equal dignity and respect. Historically, is that how the world has operated? Consider the first century when Christianity came on the scene. Did you know in Rome, it was estimated that 1 in 5 residents in Rome were slaves? Now Rome, we might think is kind of progressive, it has the rich Hellenistic culture, the Greek philosophy, the Roman organization was incredible, the Roman roads, the aqueducts, it is unbelievable what Rome was able to do in the first century. The Pax Roma, the peace that they brought to the world is really remarkable on historical things. Getting off the point. In the first century, there were about 1 in 5 residents in Rome were slaves. You know what the legal definition of a slave in Rome was? It's borrowed from Aristotle's definition. Living property. How do you think women were treated in Rome in the first century? Not much different than living property. Demosthenes has this saying. He says, we have, I'll paraphrase, we have courtesans for pleasure. Let me just paraphrase it. We have some women for pleasure. We have some women that take care of the house. We have some women that bear legitimate children for us. Women were viewed as means to an end. So check this out. Now I do have, I'll paraphrase it for you. Both Aristotle and Plato, brilliant Greek philosophers. I'm going to have to paraphrase it for you. I got the exact quotes here. Both of them had the same view of women. They were inferior to men, intellectually and emotionally. They were by nature inferior to men, so men should always dominate over them. That's the standard view on both as it regards to slavery and women that is perpetuated throughout history. So why don't we still think like that? Well, here's where it began to change. Against the cultural backdrop of slaves and women as things, consider the teaching of the Apostle Paul. In 1 Corinthians chapter 7, he says, for the wife does not have authority over her own body, but her husband does. That's the point. That seems very much like what Plato would say. In a patriarchal society, all the men would say, that's right, Paul, preaching. You got it, man. That's right. You hear that, women? I own you. What comes after that, though? Likewise, the husband does not have authority over himself, but the wife does. Whoa. You want to talk about culturally radical teaching in the first century to a world that's predominated by this form of patriarchy that views women as property, basically? Paul just said to all the women that would read this and hear these letters, you own your husband every bit that they own you. In the home, there is mutual submission. You are both made in the image of God. This is where this flows from. You're not going to find that exact. You will find mutual submission in Ephesians chapter 5, for example. But there's this beautiful description of the relationship of men and women that fundamentally flow from the biblical concept of Imago Dei that begins in Genesis 1. That from the very beginning, as Jesus would say in Matthew 19, have you not read that from the beginning? He made them male and female, and the two should become one flesh, and they will leave their father and mother. And in a place of co-equal dignity, the two of them in a partnering relationship would have dominion over the world God created. What a beautiful understanding of life in a relationship between men and women. Well, that idea, the Imago Dei understanding of what grounds human value is that's the equivalent of pulling on the thread that unraveled the fabric of slavery in society and misogyny. Now, throughout history, that's not always been practiced faithfully, but it is the philosophical and theological underpinning for the belief in full equality of all human beings. Same way in Ephesians, by the way, Ephesians chapter 6, Paul talks about slave owners, and he says this, he says, masters, do the same thing to them. Masters, stop your threatening ways. And he says, treat them well, knowing that their master and your master is in heaven, and in him is no partiality. Whoa! What did he just say to slave owners regarding their slaves? You both have a master, and he doesn't look at you any differently. So you better treat them well, knowing that both of you are going to give account to the Lord. Again, that is a powerful idea that blows up the ideology that lets slavery exist. Namely, that there are some human beings that don't possess some characteristic that makes them as valuable as you. No. All people are equally valuable because they are made in the image of God. Therefore, we should treat all people with equal dignity and respect, knowing that in so doing, we are honoring God the Father who made them in their image. So here I am giving the lecture that I said I couldn't give. You just start with those two things, meaning and value. The world is robbed of those two fundamental things that leads to the free, flourishing Western world that we now have today. That's only true because God exists. And that truth was mediated through Christianity and the Gospels, the Old Testament and the New Testament. And in the United States, we have a living document, the Constitution. We have a document, the Constitution, that was built on these principles. That fundamental part of reality is that all people are made in the image of God and they're given inalienable rights by Him. Therefore, they're entitled to these certain things. That idea didn't just come out of nowhere. It's at the end of the heritage of Christian teaching. And we're reaping the fruit of it here in the West. There's a great threat to this, man. Man, we can spend so much time, but we got to wrap this up. Friedrich Nietzsche. Everybody know who Friedrich Nietzsche is? Brilliant, again, moral philosopher, an atheist. He's most known for declaring that God is dead. I'm going to have to paraphrase because I got the quotes in my notes, but I'm not going to bother going through them. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote in Twilight of the Idols. He said, as it relates to the death of God, he did not necessarily view that as a good thing, a needed thing, because he didn't think God existed. But that was going to come at a price. He said, Christian morality is by no means self-evident. And the Western world is built on Christian morality. Central to Christian morality is the belief in God. If you pull belief in God out of that, the whole system collapses. You can't just go on with Christian morality without belief in God. And Christian morality is not by no means self-evident. What Nietzsche was warning, he's kind of an atheistic prophet. You kill God from society, you're going to suffer the consequences of a godless society. You're not going to have any basis for morality anymore. And that was the great challenge of the Enlightenment philosophers and the secular humanists of generations past. George Orwell saw the same thing. He wrote this in a brilliant essay called Notes on the Way. Now, maybe you're familiar with George Orwell because of Animal Farm or 1984. Well, George Orwell was a secular humanist. He did not believe in God. And he wrote in this book, Notes on the Way, he had said, this is a pretty close paraphrase, that for 200 years, we had sawed on the branch we were sitting on, Christianity, right? And much more suddenly than anybody had anticipated, we succeeded. And down we came. The unfortunate mistake, though, is that there wasn't a bed of roses at the bottom. There was a cesspool full of barbed wire. And so both George Orwell and Nietzsche recognized that, okay, we don't believe in God and we need to destroy the influence of God in society, but what are we going to put back in place? What is going to ground morality and value and meaning and purpose? Because the logical conclusions of our belief is nihilism, a meaningless universe that does not care about you. Good and bad fall alike entirely arbitrarily. And how are we to even say what's good and bad? They warned against this. Jordan Peterson today, similar, considers himself a disciple of Nietzsche, is warning that you atheist types that think you can just kick God out of this, you need to have a little bit more reverence for what you're attacking. Because should you succeed in this, what are you going to put back in its place? And this is why Christianity is good. it grounds these things that we take for granted, that intuitively we know. My life is a valuable, meaningful life where I am free to pursue meaningful things. If you even want to push this farther, freedom is only possible if God exists. This is where it gets really technical. I'm just going to say this and end it. And you can ask me questions about this later. If naturalism is true, then we are nothing more than biochemical machines. Chemicals react. Chemicals don't think. Free will is an illusion from a naturalistic standpoint. And I'm not mischaracterizing the position. Noted atheist Sam Harris wrote an entire book on free will where he describes the logical conclusion of naturalism is that free will is an illusion. That we are programmed by our genetics and shaped by our environment such that we have no ability to choose anything. So you think about the consequences of God not believing. We're not really free. We don't have a valuable life, and it's meaningless. This is why Christianity is so good for this world. It is definitely objectively speaking good. So, hey, thank you for making me give a mini lecture that I said I couldn't do. Are there any more questions real quickly as we conclude our time? Yes, ma'am.
Actually, very good.
Yeah.
So, Jesus says, I'm going to keep the life. What happened to Jesus before Jesus? How did they do that?
They were saved the same way we are saved, by faith. Like the story of Abraham that Paul talks about in Romans chapter 3 and 4, really 4 is where he really gets to draw out the understanding of Abraham. It said Abraham, I'm drawing a blank here. I'll paraphrase. Abraham was saved by faith. He trusted in God, and it was credited to him as righteousness, his faith. So people in the Old Testament were saved the same way we are, by responding in faith to the revelation of God that has been given to them. We're at a time in history where the revelation of who God is more clear, as we've seen in Jesus Christ, the fullness of who God the Father is. And we are required to respond in faith to that revelation. So it's the same pattern throughout history, responding in faith to the revelation of God that has been given to them.
Second question, third, they had a healing and everything's good, they sinned and it's all bad and God is good. You get all that, right? So, did Adam and Eve, did God actually mean for Adam and Eve for all this wonderful life of goodness?
And you said this was a quick question. There ain't nothing quick about this.
And then, see, I think God thought all along that they were going to sin.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Had the idea that Christ was going to be the solution.
And when I say not a quick question, that wasn't the way you delivered it, is the answer to it. That's not necessarily quick. It's not as funny as the question I was just given. Or not given, but last week, I'm not stalling or anything, but last week I was in West Virginia at a camp speaking, and in one of the Bibles was a bunch of notes where questions were written, for the question and answer time. And one of the questions on the sticky note was, if Adam and Eve had never sinned, would we all still be naked? Best question ever. It's so funny. I imagine this, because the other questions on this were sincere. This wasn't just a joke. I imagine this young man or woman really going, man, what would it be like? I don't know. So, as it relates to the Garden of Eden, and God created, knowing that Adam and Eve would sin, and knowing what would have to be the remedy for this, I think this was all known by God. And there's nothing reactionary about Jesus Christ coming. So then the question is, well then why would God make a world where he knows people are going to sin? Well, one way to ask this is that, or to look at this, would be in this way. That I do not think it is possible to create a world where sin isn't possible. That there's no form of a meaningful world that can be created by God in which the reality of sin isn't present. And the reason for that is, if you kind of even go back maybe just a step and ask the question, why would God create in the first place? God did not create because there was a lack within him. God is an all-powerful being. What we mean by that is he's entirely self-sufficient. That he doesn't lack anything within him. Sometimes you'll hear, well, I think God created because he wanted worship. Like God is some petty teenager that needs a fan club or something. No. God was perfectly content and satisfied within himself, within the Trinity, even experiencing a relational fulfillment. There's nothing that God lacked. So why would he create them? Well, I think the answer is that it is an expression of his loving nature. For the most loving thing this being could do would be to create other beings that could enjoy and know him and know existence in him. That would be a very loving act. Now, in order to know God, what must you have? You must have freedom. Freedom is a component of rationality. To know and truly know, you must be free. Moreover, one of the greatest things about life is love. God is love. And for us to share in his love and know his love. Can you know love by force? Can you know love through coercion and manipulation? What must you have the ability? What must you possess to know love? Freedom. So in that context, God creates a world as an expression of his love, not because of any lack within him. And he makes a world in which there are human beings that have volitional freedom such that they are allowed to know God and enjoy God and experience a meaningful world with him. But of course we know that if you are truly free, you have the ability to use that freedom to your own end, to worship the creation rather than worship the Creator. And that is what happened. God is still loving and merciful to do this because even still he did not abandon us. He left this world such that there is still common grace. And of course all of this story is in the context of the gospel, where God sent his son Jesus Christ ultimately to pay the final price for sin, to conquer it, such that we can be forgiven and restored back to him to enjoy that relationship once again. That's my understanding of it. And like what N.T. Wright has to say, it could be a portion of it that's misguided, perhaps. I just don't know which part of it is.
How did you feel
What would be negative? Well, I don't think there's any scenario that involves mankind not sinning, so I don't have to answer that question. Well, hey, thank you guys so much. Your hospitality, your attentiveness, the questions you asked, from start to finish, even just meeting Damien and Jim, and of course Lisa here. What is evident to me is that the Lord is doing something here, and I'm grateful for that. And I have confidence that the Lord that has begun this good work in you will see it on to fruition, as you especially continue in your faithfulness, seeking to know him, live a good life, and love your neighbor as you should. So thank you for letting me be a part of this. If there's any way that I can help you on the other side of this, through email, social media, and whatnot, please let me know. But God bless you, and may he continue to do the great work among you. Amen.